The internal temperature of the Stardust Rambler had stabilized at a miserable 5 degrees Celsius, which Jax Thorne was pretty sure was a deliberate act of spite on the part of the ship's dying environmental controls. His latest calculation showed that the portable cryo-coolant cell he was hoarding in the corner had only 48 hours of functional output remaining, assuming he didn't lean on it too hard, cough in its direction, or think a complex thought. Stranded in the black void near the Veil Nebula, a region infamous for swallowing salvage vessels whole, Jax found his usual pallid recursive anxiety sharpening into a professional, high-grade fear. His distress beacon, powered by a sputtering emergency isotope, had been spitting its plea into the silence for 21 agonizing days, a message he suspected was now so weak and outdated it was probably being picked up by a local hegemony custom station as mild static interference, ignore until quarterly review. He was meticulously, excruciatingly cleaning a patch of fried circuitry with a sonic scrubber when the main console, dead for 3 days, suddenly flared to life with a blinding, monochromatic red alert. This was not a power spike. This was the sudden, overwhelming proximity of an impossible mass. His minimal proximity sensor, designed to detect asteroids and the occasional derelict probe, had gone from 0 to maximum saturation instantly. It was like detecting a mountain by having it suddenly pressed against your nose. Jax dropped the scrubber, the plastic clattering against the metal deck. He crawled to the single functioning viewport, a thick, triple-paned pane usually displaying nothing but stardust and the cold, indifferent shine of distant galaxies. Now, the view was entirely consumed. Filling the window, swallowing the light, was an object of such terrifying scale and such silent, alien intent that Jax's first thought was simply, wrong geometry. It was not a ship built for speed or combat, but for a destiny he couldn't grasp. It was vast, its hull a seamless expanse of midnight blue-black that seemed to absorb the light of the nebula, giving it the appearance of an orbiting hole in reality. There were no visible rivets, no running lights, no identifiable weaponry, only a breathtaking, impossible sweep of obsidian geometry. He stared, mouth dry, waiting for the inevitable hail or the explosive rupture of his hull. Nothing. The silence from the behemoth was heavier than its mass. "Well," Jax muttered to the empty cabin, trying to summon some gallows humor, "at least my rescue beacon worked. Turns out, what I needed wasn't a standard hegemony tow but a sentient space cathedral." Then, a localized section of the colossal ship directly above him shimmered, opening like a gigantic, slow-blossoming metallic flower. From its core extended a single slender beam of golden light, a grav-chute field, perfectly calibrated. Before Jax could even think of reaching the manual override on his escape pod, the entire Stardust Rambler shuddered, then lifted, pulled into the maw of the silent, waiting giant. The pressure on his ship was precisely 0, a calculated, gentle embrace that nonetheless felt more forceful than any violent impact. The sheer technological arrogance of it was stunning. They didn't need to dock, they just took him. The journey up lasted only moments, yet it felt like an eternity compressed into a single, accelerating breath. The grav-chute deposited his wreck gently onto a gleaming, silver-plated deck the size of a small metropolitan park. As the golden beam retracted, the hatch of the Rambler's escape pod was cleanly, surgically sliced open, the airlock controls bypassed with what sounded like a single quiet hiss of complex decryption. Stepping out onto the alien deck felt like walking onto the stage of an opera built for gods. The air here was warm, humid, and carried a scent Jax couldn't place, something metallic, earthy, and distinctly feminine, like petrichor mixed with high-grade lubricant. The illumination was indirect, bathing the vast space in soft, golden light that emphasized the smooth, uninterrupted curves of the ship's architecture. It was less a machine interior and more a naturally occurring cavern of polished, glowing alloy. And then he saw them. They stood arranged in a loose arc, silent and waiting. 5 figures, all women, and all possessing an alarming, effortless grace that made Jax, in his grease-stained overalls and mismatched survival boots, feel like a recently excavated relic. They were all physically stunning, but in 5 intensely different, non-standard ways, a deliberate collection of the galaxy's most compelling biological puzzles. One had skin that shimmered with the color of polished jade. Another was nearly 6.5 feet tall, clad in armor that seemed to be part of her skeletal structure. A third had intricate, crystalline patterns moving beneath the surface of her dark skin like submerged fireflies. But his eyes were immediately drawn to the central figure, the one who moved first. She was the one who was most deceptively normal. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, her features fine and serene, her expression composed but deeply weary, as if she carried a star chart's worth of sorrow behind her luminous, deep violet eyes. Her hair was the color of fresh ash, pulled back severely, and she was dressed in a simple, flowing garment of the same midnight blue material as the ship's hull. She looked entirely, flawlessly human, until you noticed the ears. They swept up from the side of her head, elongating into elegant, subtly curved points, exactly like something ripped from a hyper-romantic fantasy holodrama about forest deities. It was such a specific, non-functional, and impossibly beautiful biological flourish that it momentarily broke Jax's analytical focus. Right, he thought, adjusting his grip on the useless multi-tool in his hand. Elves. In space. I knew I should have packed the emergency brandy. The woman with the elven ears stepped forward, her movement silent, her violet gaze locking onto his. You are Engineer Jax Thorne, designation Epsilon, 7-9-2. The last functioning link in the chain, she stated, her voice a low, perfectly modulated contralto that vibrated with a faint, resonant quality. I am Lyra. Welcome aboard the Daughter's Crucible. You were selected for rescue. Selected, Jax repeated, his voice raspy. He couldn't help the dry delivery. By an alien civilization that designs its command staff to look like the cover art for a very specific type of vintage human novel. I feel immensely flattered, though I must point out that my engineering specialties are primarily in obsolete fusion drives and patching ductwork with high-grade polymer tape. Lyra didn't smile, but a shadow of something passed over her face. Perhaps recognition of the joke's intent, perhaps simple pity for his nervousness. The taller woman in skeletal armor, Kira, shifted slightly, radiating an aura of contained impatience. Your specialty is irrelevant to the initial phase, Engineer Thorne, Lyra continued, dismissing his profession with a gentle wave of her hand. The choice was not made based on your skill, but on your heritage. Your distress beacon was merely the necessary trigger to confirm your presence. Before Jax could formulate a suitable response to the idea that his disastrous engine failure was actually a cosmic appointment, the ground beneath his feet pulsed once. A thin, silver light scanned him from head to toe, lingering briefly over his heart and his skull. It was not painful, but deeply invasive, feeling less like a sensor sweep and more like a librarian skimming the index of his soul. Biometric and genetic data archived, Lyra announced, addressing the entire room in a slightly raised tone. The four other queens responded with a series of nearly imperceptible nods, acknowledging the successful completion of a crucial step. Jax blinked, suddenly feeling profoundly exposed. Just to be clear, he managed, trying to sound offended instead of terrified. Did this ship just take a digital copy of my DNA? Because that's typically done after a handshake and a signed non-disclosure agreement, not 5 minutes after I nearly froze to death. Lyra merely gazed at him, the depth of her violet eyes suggesting concerns far beyond human legal etiquette. You are valuable, Engineer. Irreplaceable, in fact. We are the last of our lines. Our needs supersede conventional protocols. She turned her back on him, moving toward a shimmering bulkhead. The formalities are complete. We must leave this sector immediately. The massive hangar bay doors, which had never quite closed since his arrival, suddenly hissed shut with an airtight finality. A low, powerful vibration began to climb through the deck plating, a sound that wasn't mechanical, but felt organic, like the deep, resonant heartbeat of the ship itself. Where exactly are we going? Jax asked, scrambling to keep up as Lyra led the group toward a narrow, curving passage. Lyra glanced back, her long, pointed ear catching the golden light. To Xylos. The Golden Desert. It is a long journey, and the energy required for this jump will be substantial. Brace yourself, Engineer. Your purpose is about to begin. Before he could demand an explanation of this purpose, the ship surged. It was not the violent snap of standard warp drive engaging, nor the dizzying spiral of a jump gate transit. It was a fluid, impossible acceleration that bypassed the known laws of physics. Jax's vision momentarily tunneled into a kaleidoscope of gold and black, a sensation akin to being simultaneously stretched to the limits of the cosmos and compressed into a single point. He felt the reality of the Veil Nebula instantly retract, replaced by the crushing, terrifying silence of true interspatial travel, where the only sound was the thrumming, resonant rhythm of the daughter's crucible, carrying him and his 5 beautiful, terrifying alien queens toward a destiny he was, apparently, biologically obligated to fulfill. Jax grabbed a nearby handhold, trying to regain his equilibrium. His knees felt weak. He took a shaky breath, the unfamiliar, humid air filling his lungs. Right. Selected. Irreplaceable. Just like the last guy who had to recalibrate the main fusion manifold on a hegemony patrol cruiser before it exploded. He settled a look of resigned determination on his face. Deep breath. It's only space elves and the end of civilization. Nothing a good engineer can't fix, probably. The internal temperature of the Stardust Rambler had stabilized at a miserable 5 degrees Celsius, which Jax Thorne was pretty sure was a deliberate act of spite on the part of the ship's dying environmental controls. His latest calculation showed that the portable cryo-coolant cell he was hoarding in the corner had only 48 hours of functional output remaining, assuming he didn't lean on it too hard, cough in its direction, or think a complex thought. Stranded in the black void near the Veil Nebula, a region infamous for swallowing salvage vessels whole, Jax found his usual pallid recursive anxiety sharpening into a professional, high-grade fear. His distress beacon, powered by a sputtering emergency isotope, had been spitting its plea into the silence for 21 agonizing days, a message he suspected was now so weak and outdated it was probably being picked up by a local hegemony custom station as mild static interference, ignore until quarterly review. He was meticulously, excruciatingly cleaning a patch of fried circuitry with a sonic scrubber when the main console, dead for 3 days, suddenly flared to life with a blinding, monochromatic red alert. This was not a power spike. This was the sudden, overwhelming proximity of an impossible mass. His minimal proximity sensor, designed to detect asteroids and the occasional derelict probe, had gone from 0 to maximum saturation instantly. It was like detecting a mountain by having it suddenly pressed against your nose. Jax dropped the scrubber, the plastic clattering against the metal deck. He crawled to the single functioning viewport, a thick, triple-paned pane usually displaying nothing but stardust and the cold, indifferent shine of distant galaxies. Now, the view was entirely consumed. Filling the window, swallowing the light, was an object of such terrifying scale and such silent, alien intent that Jax's first thought was simply, wrong geometry. It was not a ship built for speed or combat, but for a destiny he couldn't grasp. It was vast, its hull a seamless expanse of midnight blue-black that seemed to absorb the light of the nebula, giving it the appearance of an orbiting hole in reality. There were no visible rivets, no running lights, no identifiable weaponry, only a breathtaking, impossible sweep of obsidian geometry. He stared, mouth dry, waiting for the inevitable hail or the explosive rupture of his hull. Nothing. The silence from the behemoth was heavier than its mass. "Well," Jax muttered to the empty cabin, trying to summon some gallows humor, "at least my rescue beacon worked. Turns out, what I needed wasn't a standard hegemony tow but a sentient space cathedral." Then, a localized section of the colossal ship directly above him shimmered, opening like a gigantic, slow-blossoming metallic flower. From its core extended a single slender beam of golden light, a grav-chute field, perfectly calibrated. Before Jax could even think of reaching the manual override on his escape pod, the entire Stardust Rambler shuddered, then lifted, pulled into the maw of the silent, waiting giant. The pressure on his ship was precisely 0, a calculated, gentle embrace that nonetheless felt more forceful than any violent impact. The sheer technological arrogance of it was stunning. They didn't need to dock, they just took him. The journey up lasted only moments, yet it felt like an eternity compressed into a single, accelerating breath. The grav-chute deposited his wreck gently onto a gleaming, silver-plated deck the size of a small metropolitan park. As the golden beam retracted, the hatch of the Rambler's escape pod was cleanly, surgically sliced open, the airlock controls bypassed with what sounded like a single quiet hiss of complex decryption. Stepping out onto the alien deck felt like walking onto the stage of an opera built for gods. The air here was warm, humid, and carried a scent Jax couldn't place, something metallic, earthy, and distinctly feminine, like petrichor mixed with high-grade lubricant. The illumination was indirect, bathing the vast space in soft, golden light that emphasized the smooth, uninterrupted curves of the ship's architecture. It was less a machine interior and more a naturally occurring cavern of polished, glowing alloy. And then he saw them. They stood arranged in a loose arc, silent and waiting. 5 figures, all women, and all possessing an alarming, effortless grace that made Jax, in his grease-stained overalls and mismatched survival boots, feel like a recently excavated relic. They were all physically stunning, but in 5 intensely different, non-standard ways, a deliberate collection of the galaxy's most compelling biological puzzles. One had skin that shimmered with the color of polished jade. Another was nearly 6.5 feet tall, clad in armor that seemed to be part of her skeletal structure. A third had intricate, crystalline patterns moving beneath the surface of her dark skin like submerged fireflies. But his eyes were immediately drawn to the central figure, the one who moved first. She was the one who was most deceptively normal. Her face was perfectly symmetrical, her features fine and serene, her expression composed but deeply weary, as if she carried a star chart's worth of sorrow behind her luminous, deep violet eyes. Her hair was the color of fresh ash, pulled back severely, and she was dressed in a simple, flowing garment of the same midnight blue material as the ship's hull. She looked entirely, flawlessly human, until you noticed the ears. They swept up from the side of her head, elongating into elegant, subtly curved points, exactly like something ripped from a hyper-romantic fantasy holodrama about forest deities. It was such a specific, non-functional, and impossibly beautiful biological flourish that it momentarily broke Jax's analytical focus. Right, he thought, adjusting his grip on the useless multi-tool in his hand. Elves. In space. I knew I should have packed the emergency brandy. The woman with the elven ears stepped forward, her movement silent, her violet gaze locking onto his. You are Engineer Jax Thorne, designation Epsilon, 7-9-2. The last functioning link in the chain, she stated, her voice a low, perfectly modulated contralto that vibrated with a faint, resonant quality. I am Lyra. Welcome aboard the Daughter's Crucible. You were selected for rescue. Selected, Jax repeated, his voice raspy. He couldn't help the dry delivery. By an alien civilization that designs its command staff to look like the cover art for a very specific type of vintage human novel. I feel immensely flattered, though I must point out that my engineering specialties are primarily in obsolete fusion drives and patching ductwork with high-grade polymer tape. Lyra didn't smile, but a shadow of something passed over her face. Perhaps recognition of the joke's intent, perhaps simple pity for his nervousness. The taller woman in skeletal armor, Kira, shifted slightly, radiating an aura of contained impatience. Your specialty is irrelevant to the initial phase, Engineer Thorne, Lyra continued, dismissing his profession with a gentle wave of her hand. The choice was not made based on your skill, but on your heritage. Your distress beacon was merely the necessary trigger to confirm your presence. Before Jax could formulate a suitable response to the idea that his disastrous engine failure was actually a cosmic appointment, the ground beneath his feet pulsed once. A thin, silver light scanned him from head to toe, lingering briefly over his heart and his skull. It was not painful, but deeply invasive, feeling less like a sensor sweep and more like a librarian skimming the index of his soul. Biometric and genetic data archived, Lyra announced, addressing the entire room in a slightly raised tone. The 4 other queens responded with a series of nearly imperceptible nods, acknowledging the successful completion of a crucial step. Jax blinked, suddenly feeling profoundly exposed. Just to be clear, he managed, trying to sound offended instead of terrified. Did this ship just take a digital copy of my DNA? Because that's typically done after a handshake and a signed non-disclosure agreement, not 5 minutes after I nearly froze to death. Lyra merely gazed at him, the depth of her violet eyes suggesting concerns far beyond human legal etiquette. You are valuable, Engineer. Irreplaceable, in fact. We are the last of our lines. Our needs supersede conventional protocols. She turned her back on him, moving toward a shimmering bulkhead. The formalities are complete. We must leave this sector immediately. The massive hangar bay doors, which had never quite closed since his arrival, suddenly hissed shut with an airtight finality. A low, powerful vibration began to climb through the deck plating, a sound that wasn't mechanical, but felt organic, like the deep, resonant heartbeat of the ship itself. Where exactly are we going? Jax asked, scrambling to keep up as Lyra led the group toward a narrow, curving passage. Lyra glanced back, her long, pointed ear catching the golden light. To Xylos. The Golden Desert. It is a long journey, And the energy required for this jump will be substantial. Brace yourself, engineer. Your purpose is about to begin. Before he could demand an explanation of this purpose, the ship surged. It was not the violent snap of standard warp drive engaging, nor the dizzying spiral of a jump gate transit. It was a fluid, impossible acceleration that bypassed the known laws of physics. Jax's vision momentarily tunneled into a kaleidoscope of gold and black, a sensation akin to being simultaneously stretched to the limits of the cosmos and compressed into a single point. He felt the reality of the Veil Nebula instantly retract, replaced by the crushing, terrifying silence of true interspatial travel, where the only sound was the thrumming, resonant rhythm of the Daughter's crucible, carrying him and his 5 beautiful, terrifying alien queens toward a destiny he was, apparently, biologically obligated to fulfill. Jax grabbed a nearby handhold, trying to regain his equilibrium. His knees felt weak. He took a shaky breath, the unfamiliar, humid air filling his lungs. Right. Selected. Irreplaceable. Just like the last guy who had to recalibrate the main fusion manifold on a hegemony patrol cruiser before it exploded. He settled a look of resigned determination on his face. Deep breath. It's only space elves and the end of civilization. Nothing a good engineer can't fix, probably. The transition out of interspatial transit was less violent than the entry, but no less disorienting. It was a cessation of motion, a sudden, heavy silence that made the residual pressure in Jax's ears pop painfully. When he opened his eyes, the curving corridor they were now traversing was bathed in a new light, a cool, deep turquoise that shifted and rippled across the metallic walls as if generated by liquid immersion. The architecture of the Daughter's crucible seemed to be in constant, subtle flux, a phenomenon Jax decided was either high-level structural optimization or a very expensive mood lighting system. He followed Lyra and the other 4 queens, Kira, the armored one whose stare could melt flux steel, Ziva, the tall, thin queen whose crystalline skin patterns currently glowed a thoughtful amethyst, and the 2 silent figures Anya, whose features were hidden behind a delicate, almost organic silver visor, and Eris, whose presence seemed to distort the light around her. They moved with the kind of synchronized elegance Jax usually associated with either highly trained special forces or large predatory cats. He, meanwhile, shuffled, trying to calculate the structural integrity of the floor under his battered boots. If this ship is truly bioengineered, Jax inquired, trying to keep his tone professional and not like a man deeply fascinated by the prospect of living inside a giant, intelligent mollusk, does that mean the crucible has feelings? Should I be worried about offending the bulkhead if I lean too hard? Lyra, leading the group toward what looked like the ship's main nerve center, glanced over her shoulder. Her elven ear caught the turquoise light, making the sharp point shine. It is a symbiotic entity, Engineer Thorne, she explained, her voice devoid of inflection, which somehow made the concept sound even more disconcerting. It responds to the collective mental state of its core inhabitants. High stress translates to increased shielding and accelerated power draw. Calm translates to lower energy use and subtle structural adjustments for comfort. Treat it with respect, and it will accommodate you. So, it's basically an incredibly high-tech, highly sensitive home assistant, Jax summarized, nodding. I'll try not to mention any historical failures of its predecessors in front of it. We don't want a mood swing that turns my cabin into a pressure cooker. Kira, walking directly behind Lyra, let out a sound that might have been a brief, humorless exhalation of air, or perhaps a warning hiss. Jax couldn't tell. He chose to treat it as the latter. They arrived in a cavernous chamber that served as the primary command bridge. It lacked screens, chairs, or traditional consoles. Instead, the center was dominated by a circular, recessed platform containing a pool of thick, dark liquid that occasionally sparked with internal light. The queens arranged themselves around this pool, each placing a hand near its surface. Our destination is Xylos, as I stated, Lyra said, turning to Jax, who remained standing several paces back, feeling acutely out of place. A sanctuary world. Before the hegemony established dominance, many civilizations, ours included, sought to place their legacies beyond destruction. We are the vessels of those legacies. At her instruction, each of the 5 queens, including Lyra herself, reached into a concealed fold of their dark garments and withdrew an object. They were 5 identical cylinders, roughly the size of a human forearm. They were made of clear, flawless crystal, but each cylinder contained a densely packed, iridescent cloud of swirling dust and light, faintly pulsing with a rhythm distinct from the ship's own resonant thrum. "These are the genetic archives," Lyra stated simply. "The totality of our people's knowledge, history, and biology. The entire library of our respective worlds, reduced to raw genetic data, waiting for reseed." Jax felt the academic side of his brain fire up, briefly overcoming his fear. "Wait, genetic archives? You mean stored on DNA strands? The data density required for entire civilizations, that's mathematically impossible with conventional storage mediums." Ziva, the tall queen with the glowing skin, finally spoke, her voice a calm, smooth baritone that sounded like it was being generated from deep within her own crystalline structure. "It is not conventional storage, Engineer Thorne. It is encoded on stabilized, synthetic chronotopes, data compressed across a four-dimensional manifold. This is why we have traveled outside of linear time. To carry this." Jax ran a hand through his hair, stunned by the casual mention of synthetic chronotopes, technology that was considered theoretical in the outer worlds. "Right. Chronotopes. So, what you have there is essentially 5 libraries, 5 encyclopedias, 5 full biological backups of entire species, all sitting in fancy jars. And you're taking it all to Xylos for incubation," Lyra finished, cutting him off before he could complete the thought. "Incubation," Jax repeated flatly. "And that's where I come in, I assume? Do I provide technical support for the giant incubator, or perhaps I'm the designated snack for the emerging baby civilizations? I do hope I'm the latter. I'd hate to be a disappointment." Kira took a step forward, her armored plating shifting with a soft, metallic click. The movement was a clear warning. "Silence the unnecessary conjecture, Epsilon 7-9-2. Your function is specific, and its sanctity is absolute." Lyra held up a hand, silencing Kira without a word. "Your function, Engineer Thorne, is tied to the ship's final destination. Before we arrive, you need to understand the environment we are traveling in, and why you are the necessary interface." She activated a sensor on the wall. A holographic image bloomed in the air beside Jax, a stylized, three-dimensional representation of the crucible. As the image slowly rotated, Jax noticed something he hadn't seen before, a pattern. The entire hull was covered in faint, recursive etchings, barely visible in the changing light, but undeniably there. They looked like complex mathematical diagrams merged with organic growth patterns. "This vessel is not merely shielded, it is cloaked," Lyra explained. "We are moving through hegemony-controlled space, but they cannot detect us because we occupy a subtle, temporary displacement outside the standard dimensional manifold. A delicate process that requires extreme energy regulation." "Right. Temporal displacement," Jax mumbled, recognizing the strange readings he'd seen in the engineering bay. He felt a brief moment of academic elation, immediately followed by dread. "That explains why the power keeps fluctuating. You're drawing energy from the jump point itself, not the core. That's a textbook recipe for instability. If the gravitational field shifts even slightly, you'll be spat out somewhere inconvenient, like the middle of a supernova or a hegemony administrative planet." Lyra's violet eyes narrowed slightly in appreciation of his diagnosis. "Precisely. The instability is constant. We are 5 queens, but we are also 5 separate power conduits. The sheer psychic and genetic dissonance between us causes perpetual internal stress on the chronotope field." "Ah, the old, too many cooks spoil the broth issue," Jax remarked, adjusting his posture. "Except the broth is the fabric of spacetime and the cooks are alien royalty." "Got it. So you need me to." "You are a neutral anchor," Lyra stated, using a term that made Jax feel less like a person and more like a very heavy boat accessory. "Your specific genetic markers, which are, forgive the bluntness, remarkably primitive and simple, act as a stable, low-frequency node that binds the dissonant energies of our individual fields. You stabilize the ship, and you stabilize the archives. You are the glue." Jax stared. "I'm the glue? So my destiny is to be the galactic equivalent of space-grade putty." Eris, the queen who distorted the light, finally spoke. Her voice was a low, melodic whisper that seemed to come from just behind his ear, though she was standing 10 feet away. Do not underestimate the value of cohesion, Engineer Thorne. You are preventing the catastrophic collapse of 5 unique realities into one temporal singularity. That is far more than mere putty. That's very reassuring, Jack said, trying to steady his nerves. It's nice to know my purpose in life is preventing a multi-species singularity event, especially since my last job involved fixing a broken coffee machine using a paperclip and residual static charge. Quite the career leap. Lyra actually allowed a faint, brief upturn of the corners of her mouth, the closest thing to a smile Jax had seen yet. We appreciate your pragmatic perspective. Now, we must assign you to your duty station. His duty station, it turned out, was the secondary engineering access tunnel, a cramped corridor running parallel to the main plasma conduits. Here, Lyra showed him a complex, circular junction box humming ominously. This is a neural interface station, she explained. We need to plug you into the system. It will constantly monitor your unique neural rhythm and broadcast it through the ship's stabilization grid. Jax looked at the interface, a series of thin, sharp metallic filaments that looked suspiciously like advanced acupuncture needles, and then at Lyra. Plug me in? Like a common power cable? I was under the impression I was going to be doing some actual engineering, maybe checking the stress fractures on the chronotope field with a wrench. The interface is necessary, Lyra insisted. It is harmless. And it is vital that you remain calm and relaxed. Your stress translates directly into systemic instability. Calm and relaxed, Jax repeated, his hands starting to shake slightly. I'm about to plug my brain into a ship run by 5 alien queens who intend to incubate their dead civilizations in some desert, and you want me to be calm? You realize I was rescued from a situation where my biggest worry was not running out of synthetic crackers. Now my biggest worry is preventing the end of reality because I got a headache. He sighed, resigning himself to the inevitable absurdity. Fine. But if I wake up with the urge to write epic poetry or invent a new form of interstellar bureaucracy, I'm sending you the therapy bills. Lyra gave him a look that clearly communicated that therapy bills were perhaps the least of his, or the galaxy's, immediate concerns. She motioned him toward the interface. Jax took off his grimy jumpsuit, revealing a threadbare synth undershirt, and reluctantly leaned into the cradle-like interface panel. The metallic filaments, cool and surprisingly gentle, extended and locked onto the major neural nexus points on his temples and the base of his skull. A low, persistent hum started, and a wave of cool, almost anesthetic energy washed over him. Suddenly, the complexity of the ship, the 5 distinct, powerful wills of the queens, the sheer impossibility of the synthetic chronotopes, it all flowed into his consciousness, not as data, but as sensation. He felt the ship's heartbeat, the distant, impossible speed of their transit, and, most disturbingly, the constant, silent pressure exerted by the 5 crystalline archives, each one screaming its desire for continuation into the void. The dissonant energy Lyra had mentioned was overwhelming. 5 distinct, incompatible psychic frequencies that threatened to tear the ship apart. Jax's simple, low-frequency human brain acted as a kind of sonic dampener, a blank canvas upon which the others could stabilize their chaos. A thought, cold and crisp, cut through the noise. This is not merely the end of a line. This is the ultimate, final gamble. It wasn't his thought. It was Lyra's, filtering through the neural interface. Jax opened his eyes, staring at the curving metallic roof of the tunnel. So, you are all the last queens, the final genetic carriers of your peoples, he whispered, his voice weak. Lyra, still standing nearby, confirmed his realization. We are the only ones who possess the necessary longevity and the ability to maintain the psychic link with the archives for the duration of the journey. We are the last living links. Jax absorbed this terrible, profound information. Right. So, 5 alien queens, on a spaceship powered by my nervous system, running from an unseen enemy, carrying the only records of 5 dead species. And I thought my last quarterly project review was stressful. He closed his eyes again, letting the strange, stabilizing rhythm of the ship wash over him. He had 2 choices: panic and destabilize reality, or embrace his role as the galaxy's most important paperweight. Given the consequences of option 1, Jax decided to focus on his breathing. He had a lot of work to do, mostly involving maintaining perfect mental equilibrium while surrounded by incredibly beautiful, destiny-burdened alien women. It felt like the setup for a very dangerous, very strange holiday cruise. The journey through the interspatial displacement field quickly settled into a routine of profound, unsettling strangeness. Jack spent most of his time hardwired into the neural interface cradle in the auxiliary tunnel, acting as the designated neutral anchor. His days were measured not by hours or sunlight, but by the subtle, continuous thrum of the synthetic chronotopes and the highly irregular power fluctuations that coursed through the ship. He found that if he mentally whistled old, pre-hegemony folk songs, the energy flows seemed marginally smoother. He tried explaining this stabilizing effect to Lyra, who simply stared at him with unblinking violet eyes and transcribed his theory as pragmatic application of rhythmic auditory distraction to maintain low-frequency neural rhythm. "It's not distraction, it's mood setting," Jax insisted one afternoon, unplugging himself for his mandated 2 hours of walking and sustenance. "If the fate of 5 dead civilizations rests on the stability of my brain, the least I can do is give it some decent background music." Lyra was, as usual, in the main command center, standing near the shimmering pool, looking like a statue carved from moonlight. "Your human songs are mathematically simple. Their repetition is beneficial. Continue the effort, Engineer Thorne." "Will do, Queen Lyra," Jax replied with a sharp bow. "Just let me know if the Crucible starts demanding jazz. That means we're in real trouble." The 5 queens maintained their impenetrable distance. They communicated mostly through nonverbal cues and silent, efficient maneuvers around the bridge, creating an atmosphere that was less a command crew and more a perpetual, high-stakes ballet. Jax noticed that their individual crystalline archives, resting near the central pool, pulsed with different, often conflicting rhythms. Lyra's was a slow, steady heartbeat. Kira's, the warrior queen, was quick and erratic, while Ziva's, the intellectual queen, was a fast, complex, multi-layered flicker. This dissonance, Jax realized, was the source of the persistent stress on the displacement field. His 2 hours of freedom usually involved eating nutrient paste that tasted vaguely of galvanized metal and attempting to explore the massive ship. The Crucible was truly organic in its construction. Corridors would subtly widen or narrow based on proximity, and access points would shimmer into existence only when required. Jax's greatest curiosity lay in the engineering core, which he was strictly forbidden from entering, save for the auxiliary tunnel. One cycle, however, he found a previously hidden maintenance hatch ajar, a sliver of opportunity. He slipped inside, armed with nothing but his multi-tool and a deep sense of professional mischief. The engineering core was a symphony of impossible physics. It wasn't powered by a conventional fusion reactor. It utilized an anomalous signature engine, ASE, a theoretical device that Jax had spent his career searching for. The ASE didn't generate energy. It seemed to capture and condense the residual energy of every jump they had ever made, effectively running on the ghost of past momentum. As he was admiring the impossible loops of shimmering conduit, Kira appeared behind him with the suddenness of a temporal distortion. Her armored plating, which he now realized wasn't armor, but an incredibly dense, organic exoskeleton, gave her the profile of a 6.5-foot-tall, very angry arthropod. Epsilon 7-9-2. Kira's voice was a flat, deep growl, amplified by her suit. "This area is restricted. Violation of this boundary is considered an act of hostile sabotage against the archives." Jax, his heart hammering against his ribs, turned slowly, adopting his most earnest, apologetic engineer face. "My apologies, Queen Kira. I experienced an involuntary system crash, my own internal one. I felt a compelling need to inspect the resonant frequency dampeners. They're critical for displacement travel, and frankly, I was worried the ship was starting to drift toward country western instead of folk." Kira simply stared, unamused. "Your humor is mathematically inefficient, Thorne. State your true objective." "My true objective is survival, Queen Kira," Jax admitted, putting a hand on the cool metal of the conduit. "And the best way for me to achieve that is to understand the ASE. I noticed a subtle nonlinear fluctuation in the engine output signature. It's not drawing enough inertia. This indicates that either the previous jump was insufficient, or something else is drawing power from the main core." Kira remained still for a long, tense moment. Jax could feel her assessing him, her mind working through his technical jargon. The ASE is secure, she finally stated, her voice marginally softer. The power fluctuation is intentional. We are preparing for the final approach to Xylos. The ship is currently routing non-essential power to the omnidirectional sensor array. Sensors. Jax frowned. Why waste energy on sensors when we're supposed to be cloaked and safe in deep space? Kira did not answer, but instead pointed to a small, unassuming datapad embedded in the wall near the engine core. Jax realized it looked suspiciously like the standard datapad model issued by the long-defunct Colonial Exploration Agency, a relic. Access that terminal, Engineer Thorne, Kira commanded. The ship has authorized a one-time, low-level data transmission to your neural anchor. It contains the specifics of your current role. Jax, intrigued and slightly wary, placed his hand on the terminal. A faint, low-level pulse registered in his palm, and instantly, a torrent of data flooded his mind. Not the feeling of the chronotopes, but pure, unadulterated information. It bypassed his visual cortex entirely, slamming directly into his cognitive centers. He stumbled back, shaking his head to clear the sudden, impossible volume of knowledge. The data wasn't just technical. It was historical. He saw images of Xylos, a swirling expanse of golden dust oceans, punctuated by immense, smooth black monoliths, identical to the one he had seen in the projection. And then he saw the star chart Lyra had displayed earlier. On the chart, the location of Xylos was marked not only by a cryptic symbol but by a pattern that matched the internal geometric sequence of his own distress beacon. His beacon was not a desperate call for help. It was a pre-programmed, generations-old activation key. The data dump also included schematics of the ASE and the Crucible's bioengineered core. Jack scrolled through the lines of alien engineering data with dizzying speed. He realized that the engine was drawing power not just from past momentum, but from a persistent, external signal on Xylos itself. The engine was essentially a receiving dish, not a generator. And then he saw the final, chilling schematic, a diagram of the neural link between the 5 crystalline archives and the ship's stabilizing mechanism. It clearly showed a 6th node, currently occupied by Jax's own neural anchor. The purpose of this 6th node wasn't stabilization. It was a harmonizer, a critical component needed to facilitate a massive, singular data transfer. My role is not that of glue, Jax stated, looking up at Kira, his eyes wide with this new, terrifying understanding. It's a tuning fork. I'm here to neutralize the psychic dissonance of the archives so they can be merged for transfer. Kira's exoskeleton shifted. You are valuable, Thorne. That is the only relevant designation. Valuable, Jax repeated dryly. And once the tuning is complete, I assume the tuning fork is discarded? Or perhaps melted down for scrap? Kira stepped closer, her massive frame overshadowing him. The final phase requires a highly specialized receptacle. You must trust Lyra's command, Engineer. Your purpose is not termination, but continuation. Before Jax could press her on the meaning of receptacle, the ship's primary resonant thrum changed pitch, ascending into a high, sustained tone that rattled Jax's teeth. The turquoise lighting in the tunnel flashed briefly to a blinding amber. We are approaching the gravitational field, Kira announced, pivoting with unexpected speed. The omnidirectional sensor array is active. We must return to the bridge. Jax, his head swimming with the downloaded data and the sheer weight of his new understanding, scrambled to keep up. As they reached the bridge, Lyra was already standing over the liquid pool, her archive cylinder glowing with painful intensity. We have arrived, Lyra announced, her voice strained. Prepare for atmospheric entry. The ship began to shudder violently, buffeted not by wind, but by the intense, turbulent, localized warp signatures common to Xylos. Jax peered through the primary viewport, which suddenly dissolved from a metallic wall into a transparent pane of hyper-durable crystalline material. Below them stretched the planet Xylos, a landscape of impossible beauty and utter desolation. It was endless, rolling waves of golden desert sand that stretched to the horizon, catching the dim, distant light of the nebula. The sky was a pale, sulphurous orange, and the air was thick with the dust of geological ages. And dotting the vast, empty expanse, Jack saw them, the massive, black monoliths, rising from the sand like colossal, obsidian crystals, each one geometrically perfect and radiating a faint, almost invisible energy signature that was feeding directly into the crucible's ASE. "That's the energy source," Jax whispered, pointing to the largest monolith, a spire several kilometers high that pulsed with a rhythmic, low-frequency hum he could now perceive without the interface. "The ASE isn't generating. It's drawing from those monoliths." "They are the transmitters," Lyra confirmed, her voice tight with focus. "They have waited for the correct signal for 10 millennia. We are now within the zone of influence." As the crucible began its final, slow descent, another queen, the masked Anya, pointed to the edge of the desert where the golden sand met a dark, jagged ridge. "A vessel," Anya stated, her voice electronically filtered to a synthetic monotone. "Unidentified. Not hegemony. Not from our archive logs." Jax leaned closer to the viewport. A small, fast, highly irregular ship, built for evasion and speed, was rapidly crossing the desert toward the largest monolith, the one the crucible was aiming for. "Well, that's just fantastic," Jax muttered, adjusting his mental whistle to a slightly less cheerful tune. 5,000 light-years of secret space travel, and we hit traffic right at the finish line. Do you think they're here for the same priceless genetic artifacts, or maybe they just heard Xylos has the best golden dust for making cocktails?" Lyra ignored the joke, her eyes fixed on the approaching intruder. "Prepare the landing sequence. And Engineer Thorne, return to your anchor. We will need maximum stability for the final landing. This is no longer a rescue mission. It is a race." Jax didn't argue. He scrambled back to the engineering tunnel, the image of the golden desert and the strange rival ship burned into his mind. He plugged himself back into the metallic filaments, settling into the familiar, humming rhythm of the ship. As the cool anesthetic energy washed over him, he braced himself. He was no longer just a scientist or a fugitive. He was the 6-foot length of space putty standing between 5 powerful, desperate women and whatever dangerous destiny awaited them on the golden sands of Xylos. The final stages of atmospheric entry were an exercise in controlled chaos. Jax, locked into the neural anchor, felt the ship shudder and groan as it fought the turbulent, mineral-laden air currents of Xylos. The energy drain was catastrophic. The ASE, now fully committed to drawing power from the ground monoliths, was screaming under the load. Jax had to focus every ounce of his concentration on maintaining his neutral anchor rhythm, a task made significantly harder by the fact that the 5 queens, huddled around the control pool, were broadcasting 5 simultaneous, highly stressed neural frequencies. "I need you to lower the internal psychic resonance by 30%, Lyra," Jax shouted, his voice amplified and filtered through the anchor's comms directly into the bridge. "You're overloading the harmonics. I'm getting feedback that tastes like burnt coffee and existential dread." Lyra, her face glistening with effort, shot a command back. "Impossible, Engineer Thorne. We are actively suppressing the planetary turbulence. Maintain stability, or we will be incinerated." "Incinerated, right. Always the high-stakes option," Jax muttered to himself, forcing his mind back to the folk song that seemed to keep the ASE happy. He tried a more calming visualization, imagining himself fishing quietly back on Earth, though the mental image was immediately interrupted by a flash of Ziva's complex, analytical fear, a fear that presented itself as a rapidly scrolling list of geometric failure probabilities. "Ziva, stop running statistical collapse models," Jax yelled. "It's making the chronotope field twitch. Think about something simple. A nice, solid theorem. Like, a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points. That's boring. Boring is good right now." Miraculously, Ziva's neural signature seemed to calm, replacing the chaotic numbers with a slow, predictable sine wave. The ship stabilized just enough for the gravitic stabilizers to kick in with a powerful, grinding force. The daughter's crucible slammed down onto the golden desert sand, burying itself slightly past the keel, the impact throwing a tremendous cloud of glittering gold dust high into the sulphurous orange sky. Silence. Then, a low, powerful thrum resumed from the ASE, now receiving clean, overwhelming power from the immense monolith towering kilometers away. Jax disconnected himself from the neural anchor, peeling the filaments away from his temples. He was drenched in sweat and felt like he had just spent 3 hours mediating a fight between 5 astrophysicists arguing over the definition of zero. He staggered onto the bridge, where the 5 queens were recovering, breathing heavily, but now radiating a triumphant, unified focus. Lyra was staring through the viewport at the rival ship that had landed barely a kilometer away, nestled near the base of the monolith. "The intruder vessel is powered down," Lyra stated, her voice tight. "Their cloaking technology is rudimentary. But they know we are here." Jax hobbled over to the viewport, rubbing the spots where the filaments had been attached. The rival ship was small, fast, and angular, painted a utilitarian gray. It looked like a hegemony scout vessel that had skipped a few maintenance cycles. "That's definitely a scout class, Lyra," Jax confirmed, peering at the hull geometry. "They're not here for a fight. They're here for observation, or maybe they're just early for the party. Either way, they beat us to the biggest piece of impossible alien architecture on the planet." "The monolith is the goal," Lyra agreed, turning from the window to address the collective. Her elven ears were twitching faintly, a sign of high tension. "It is the receiving matrix. We must initiate the transfer protocol immediately, before they can intervene." "What exactly is the transfer protocol?" Jax asked, stepping closer to the pool where the 5 archives sat, now glowing with a furious, coordinated light. "I saw the schematics. It's not a data upload. The monolith is huge, but it's passive. It's a lens. It receives the signal and broadcasts it across the sector. So, what are you transmitting?" Lyra walked toward him, her serene expression giving way to a look of profound, exhausted determination. "We are transmitting the archives. But the monolith only understands one language: progenitor geometry. The geometric key must be unlocked, and the archives must be merged into a single, cohesive entity before transmission. And that cohesion is me, the neutral anchor," Jax concluded, nodding grimly. "But merging 5 chronotope fields? That's not just a data transfer, that's a controlled singularity event. What's the receptacle, Lyra? Where does the merged data go before it hits the monolith?" Lyra stopped directly in front of him, her gaze unwavering. "The data goes into the most genetically compatible, living male organism at the locus of the transfer field. The one carrying the ancestral marker. The one your rescue beacon identified." Jax felt a sudden, icy knot form in his stomach. "Wait a minute. You mean me?" "You're not using me to tune the transfer. You're using me as a temporary biological buffer. The chronotope archives require a stabilized, high-purity biological vessel for final coherence before the monolith can accept the full broadcast," Lyra explained, her tone flat and factual, devoid of apology. "You are the final living link in a chain planned 10,000 years ago. You are the incubator." Jax threw his hands up, a wave of frustrated energy nearly tripping the proximity sensor. "The incubator. I was glue, then a tuning fork, and now I'm a cosmic petri dish. This is a terrible job description. Does this job come with hazard pay, Lyra? Or at least a decent synthetic cracker flavor that doesn't taste like old batteries?" Kira stepped in, placing her hand on her hip, a gesture that in her case resembled the loading mechanism of a heavy ordnance weapon. "The transfer process is quick, Engineer Thorne. It will be painful, but necessary. After the archives are safely transferred to you, they will be stable enough for the monolith to draw them out for broadcast." "Painful," Jax sputtered. "We're talking about merging 5 entire civilizations into my brain. I can barely remember where I put my sonic screwdriver. That's not painful, that's a neural obliteration event. I'll come out of this demanding to know the tax codes of 3 different alien empires and speaking in complex, dead languages." Ziva, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, "The risk of permanent cognitive degradation is calculated at 78%. However, the probability of the crucible failing due to continued dissonance is 100% if we do not proceed." "Well, that's comforting," Jax replied, trying to force a laugh that came out as a desperate squeak. "It's nice to know I'm dying for the good of the statistical average." He turned sharply and headed toward the engineering tunnel, his mind racing. "I need a minute to mentally prepare for the end of my intellectual life. I'm going back to my anchor. Maybe I can download a few good recipes before I become a sentient USB drive." As he stormed into the auxiliary tunnel, Lyra's voice followed him, firm and low. "Engineer Thorne, You cannot sabotage this. Your purpose is destiny. Jax didn't look back. He settled into the cradle, but instead of plugging in, he used the secondary control panel he'd identified earlier. The data he had illegally downloaded from Kira's terminal was screaming in his memory, showing him the ASE's full schema. He saw the transfer conduit, the pathway the merged archives would take from the pool, through the ship's stabilizing mechanism, and into the cradle where he sat. He realized the monolith's pull was so strong that it was creating a powerful, localized magnetic field around the entire ship. This field was destabilizing the primitive cloaking tech on the scout vessel outside. A distraction. That's what I need. Jax quickly overrode the power routing Kira had boasted about earlier. Instead of maintaining stability, he diverted residual auxiliary power, the small amount they were still using for life support and minor lighting, to the Crucible's long-dormant automated defense batteries. They were old, plasma-charged kinetics, probably untested for centuries, but they were there. He felt the sudden jolt in the power system, the familiar groan of protesting metal as ancient capacitors charged. He quickly routed the target acquisition data from the omnidirectional sensor array, the one Kira had mentioned earlier, directly to the cannons. His target was not the scout vessel itself. It was the monolith's base. If I hit the base where the power draw is highest, the sudden interruption in energy flow should create a massive, localized magnetic feedback loop. That ought to cook the electronics in that scout ship like popcorn. He executed the fire command. The ship bucked violently, two thunderous thwumps echoing through the hull as the ancient plasma kinetics discharged. He didn't wait to see the impact. He pulled himself out of the cradle, grabbed his multi-tool, and sprinted back toward the bridge. He arrived just as the main viewport showed the effect. The scout ship, already hovering nervously near the monolith's base, was instantly engulfed in a chaotic storm of electromagnetic interference. Sparks flew from its hull, and it dropped heavily onto the golden sand. The monolith itself, however, was unaffected. It was too massive, too alien. But the momentary power disruption had achieved its goal. It neutralized the immediate threat from the rival vessel. The five queens were staring at the viewport, then slowly turned to Jax, their expressions a mix of awe and furious disbelief. "You fired the ancient plasma cannons," Lyra stated flatly, the tips of her elven ears vibrating with suppressed emotion. "Self-preservation protocols," Jax explained, trying to catch his breath. "They were snooping. I gave them a taste of good, old-fashioned kinetic deterrence. Now they're just an expensive paperweight. You're welcome. Crisis averted. Now, let's talk about this incubator part." Lyra's violet eyes flashed with an intensity that promised either an ancient kiss or swift execution. "You have bought us time, Engineer Thorn. But you have violated the sanctity of the vessel. We proceed now. Kira, secure the conduit. Ziva, activate the merge." The tall queen in the skeletal exoskeleton, Kira, moved with brutal efficiency. She activated a hidden hatch in the floor of the bridge, revealing a series of thick, biosynthetic cables that snaked out and connected to the base of the pool containing the archives. Ziva began running a complex sequence on a floating holographic interface. "The merging sequence is initiated," Ziva announced, her crystalline skin glowing a brilliant, frantic white. Dissonance neutralized by the previous firing sequence's massive power demand. Temporal window: 90 seconds until full cohesion. Lyra moved swiftly to a small, hidden panel near the pool and pulled out a circular, polished disk of bone-white material. She approached Jax, her face set in a mask of finality. "The time for negotiation is over, Engineer Thorn. This progenitor key is necessary to stabilize your biology for the reception of the archives. It will ensure that the transfer does not immediately incinerate your cognitive centers, merely repurpose them." Jax backed away slightly, his multi-tool now clicking open into its rudimentary cutting laser. "Repurpose them? Look, Lyra, I appreciate the need for continuity, but I'm an engineer, not a library card. I didn't come this far to become the walking encyclopedia of 5 dead civilizations. I refuse to be a sentient gene bank." "Refusal is mathematically impossible," Lyra replied, her voice soft but absolute. "Your biology is keyed to this moment. We are the last of our kind, and you are the mechanism for their continuation." Kira took a step toward him, blocking the main exit, her massive armored form filling the space. Anya and Eris moved to flank him, cutting off his retreat. He was trapped on the bridge, the archives behind Lyra glowing with an increasingly terrifying, unified light. Jax looked from Kira's deadly posture to Lyra's determined expression, then down at the pitiful cutting laser in his hand. "Okay," Jax said, swallowing hard. "Just hear me out. If I'm going to carry the entire genetic legacy of 5 species, shouldn't I at least get a chance to meet the other 4 species representatives before they move in? It's only polite. I mean, I'm hosting a whole population, you know." Lyra ignored his attempt at levity, holding the progenitor key out in a final, unyielding gesture. "The archives are merging. 40 seconds. Jax. It is time to embrace your destiny." Jax stared at the progenitor key in Lyra's hand, then at the frantic light emanating from the archives. 40 seconds until his consciousness became the main storage server for 5 extinct species. His cutting laser, a tool meant for slicing through thin-gauge alloy, felt pathetically inadequate against the combined will of 5 highly evolved alien queens. "Look, Lyra," Jax pleaded, forcing a casual lean against a piece of structural support that probably contained critical energy conduits. "I'm sure the data integrity of my genome is excellent, but for this kind of data fusion, you need redundancy. You need a dedicated, hardened server rack, not a slightly stressed, coffee-dependent human male. Have you considered a synthetic host? Something with high thermal resistance and a decent cooling system." The chronotope archives require a direct, biologically resonant connection to the ancestral marker Jax. Lyra corrected him, using his first name for the first time, a sound that felt both intimate and utterly terrifying. "Synthetics are too rigid. They would incinerate the data upon fusion. You are the only stable variable left." 30 seconds. Kira took another step, the metallic click of her exoskeleton echoing the countdown in Jax's mind. He had to pivot, not just physically, but logically. He couldn't fight them. He had to engineer a better solution, or at least a temporary escape route that preserved his sanity. "All right, let's talk engineering specifics then," Jax said, his mind racing through the recently downloaded ASE schematics. "The monolith is the transmitter, which means it needs constant alignment. If the crucible is sitting in a low-frequency warp field, any sudden disruption to that field could shift the monolith's alignment, even for a millisecond. If the archives merge during a shift, the resulting broadcast will be fragmented, corrupted, and ultimately useless." Lyra paused, her hand lowering slightly. Ziva, across the bridge, glanced up from her holographic interface, her crystalline skin patterns flickering rapidly in acknowledgement of the potential truth in his statement. The intellectual queen saw the flaw in the execution plan before the warrior queen did. "The monolith's alignment is static, Thorn," Kira challenged, her voice a low rumble. "It is fixed to the planetary core." "Is it?" Jax countered, pushing his advantage. "You said the ASE is drawing energy from the monolith, right? The stronger the draw, the deeper the engagement with the localized warp field. I already fired the cannons and stabilized the external threat. That means we have a temporary power surplus in the ASE's non-essential buffer. If I reroute that surplus back into the original warp field generator, the one you used to get here, it will create a localized, non-critical temporal feedback loop right around the monolith. That will cause an instantaneous minute shift in the receiving matrix, effectively giving us 5 seconds of clean transmission disruption." He pointed toward the auxiliary tunnel. "I can execute that reroute from the neural anchor cradle. It requires a specific, biometric sequence that only I know from my unauthorized system access. Lyra, give me 20 seconds to execute the stabilization reroute, and then you can proceed with the incubation. You need a perfect broadcast, and I'm telling you, this atmospheric entry shook the monolith just enough to put you outside the 3 sigma margin of error. You need that correction." Lyra hesitated. Her violet eyes searched his face, calculating the risk. The desire for a perfect, uncorrupted transmission of her entire civilization's essence clearly battled with her distrust of the unpredictable human. 20 seconds, Lyra commanded, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "If you deviate from the reroute sequence, Kira will terminate the process and retrieve the archives manually." "Fair enough," Jax said, executing a sharp turn and sprinting back toward the engineering tunnel. "But if this works, Lyra, You owe me a full explanation about the historical significance of my ancestor and why he designed his distress beacon to summon alien royalty for genetic archiving. And I want non-battery-flavored rations. He threw himself into the auxiliary tunnel, slamming back into the cradle. The metallic filaments reattached to his skull with a cool, sharp sensation. He didn't even bother with the folk song this time. He plunged directly into the ASE schematic data, his thoughts becoming pure, focused computational directives. He initiated the feedback reroute, pulling the stored power from the cannons and shunting it into the temporal displacement generator. 15 seconds. He felt the warp field generator groan under the sudden, unexpected surge. The ship's lighting flickered violently, oscillating between the soothing turquoise and a harsh, emergency red. The monolith's pull, which he could feel psychically through the neural link, diminished, then stuttered, as the receiving matrix shifted infinitesimally. 10 seconds. He completed the sequence. The reroute was active. The temporal feedback loop was initiated, creating a microbubble of instability around the monolith's base. It was a chaotic solution, but mathematically, it stabilized the transmission window. Jax ripped the filaments from his head, the sudden silence deafening. He vaulted back onto the bridge. Lyra was waiting for him, the progenitor key still in her hand, but her expression had changed from apprehension to acceptance. Ziva gave him a swift, almost imperceptible nod of professional approval. "Reroute confirmed, Lyra," Jax said, panting slightly. "You have your 5 seconds of clean signal window. Do it." Lyra didn't waste another second. She raised the progenitor key and pressed it against her own temple. The small disk pulsed with a brilliant white light, and she let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. "Merge initiated," Ziva shouted. "Cohesion at 20%, 40%. The 5 crystalline archives levitated above the pool, their swirling contents accelerating into a single, blinding pillar of light. The light was no longer distinct, but a furious, unified golden stream. This stream flowed down into the central pool, which began to bubble and steam, and then channeled itself into the thick, biosynthetic cables that led directly toward the neural anchor cradle Jax had just vacated. Lyra, still holding the key, swayed slightly. Her human features were momentarily overwhelmed by the immense energy, and her elven ears seemed to elongate further, catching the merging light. "Jax," she gasped, her voice raw with effort, "we are indebted. But the window is closing. You must receive the archives now. Submit to the destiny of the progenitors." She approached him swiftly, intending to press the progenitor key against his own forehead. But Jax, having just engineered a temporal feedback loop, was not about to be outsmarted by a circular piece of bone. He didn't run. Instead, he pulled the one item of actual use from his utility belt, a coil of high-grade polymer binding cable normally used to strap down cargo, and hurled it toward the archives pool. The cable, powered by the residual velocity from his throw, wrapped itself around the bundle of 5 thick, biosynthetic transfer cables connecting the pool to the cradle. With a violent, sharp tug, Jax pulled the entire bundle, cables, conduit, and transfer node, out of the floor of the bridge. The unified golden stream of the archives, now fully merged into a single entity, suddenly lost its direct, stable path to the cradle. The energy, the combined knowledge, history, and biology of 5 dead civilizations, erupted, showering the bridge in a wave of blinding, non-physical light and warmth. Temporal window exceeded. Data integrity compromised. Ziva shrieked, her crystalline skin flashing a furious sequence of error messages. The archives, now a single, volatile entity, began to search for a host. The golden energy swirled around Jax, enveloping him, but without the physical contact of the progenitor key, the archives couldn't execute the final, invasive transfer. The biosynthetic cables Jax had ripped out whipped around like frenzied serpents. Kira, enraged, moved with impossible speed. She didn't bother with words or warnings. She launched herself across the bridge, her armored fist aimed directly at Jax's head. Jax dodged purely on instinct, dropping flat onto the deck. Kira's blow missed him, slamming into the main holographic projector console Lyra had been using. The console shattered into 1,000 pieces of sparking light and metallic dust. Lyra, realizing that the immediate threat was no longer the monolith but Kira's righteous fury, shouted, "Kira, wait!" He has disrupted the trajectory, not the process. The archives are still merged. Jax scrambled backward, grabbing the coil of cables. Look, I'm not fighting you, Kira. I'm just trying to stabilize the containment field. You can't put a singularity into an unhardened server. It'll crash everything. As Kira paused, momentarily confused by the engineering terminology, Jax noticed his opportunity. Lying near the shattered console was the progenitor key, knocked from Lyra's grasp when she had been distracted by the reroute. Jax lunged, snatching the key from the deck. The smooth, bone-white disc felt warm and strangely resonant in his hand. "Lyra, listen to me," Jax yelled, holding the key up. "I know how to stop the process, or at least stabilize the merged archive entity. But I need full control of the ship's gravitic stabilizers and the communications array. I am not destroying the archives. I am securing them." Lyra looked at the chaotic swirl of golden energy that was once her people, then at the smoking scout ship outside the window, and finally at the progenitor key in Jax's hand. She was cornered. Her people's destiny was either a corrupt, fragmented broadcast or a high-risk gamble on the sanity of the only human male in 10,000 years to understand their archaic system. "What is your price, Engineer Thorne?" Lyra asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "My price." Jax chuckled, the sound thin and strained. "My price is full access to the ship systems, immediate termination of the incubator designation, and the full, unencrypted history of my ancestors' connection to your progenitors. And," he added, unable to resist the final demand, "we are going to find a synthetic material, a biocomposite resin, in the maintenance bay, and we are going to build a proper, hardened storage vessel for this data. I am not the solution. I am the engineer who is going to build the solution." Lyra stared at him, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence on the bridge was broken only by the angry hum of the archives swirling around them. "You are forcing a compromise," Lyra stated, her voice laced with ancient resentment. "It's the only mathematically sound solution," Jax insisted, standing his ground. "You want perfect transmission? You need perfect containment. Now give me the access codes, or this entire glorious merged civilization is going to end up as highly volatile, genetically dense confetti." Kira, sensing Lyra's hesitation, took a slow, deliberate step toward Jax. "Give the Queen the key, Epsilon, 7-9-2. Now." "Not until the compromise is accepted," Jax said, planting his feet firmly. "Look, Kira, I know you want to flatten me, but if I go, the archive goes with me, in a very unstable, very explosive way. I'm a hostage, yes, but I'm a hostage with the one thing you can't live without, an exit strategy that doesn't involve the extinction of 5 peoples." Lyra closed her eyes, a gesture of deep, agonizing surrender. She opened them, the violet gaze now sharp and resolute. "Accepted, Engineer Thorne," Lyra commanded. "But know this, if the archives are damaged, your life will be measured in milliseconds." She transmitted a complex sequence of numerical and geometric data directly into the neural anchor's cradle, which Jax's multi-tool picked up and relayed to his internal datapad. "Full access." "Excellent," Jax said, feeling a dizzying wave of relief and disbelief wash over him. "Now, stand back, everyone. I need to get this volatile cloud of historical significance under control. And someone find me a wrench. I need to check the plasma regulators after that little cannon firing incident. Professional courtesy, you know." He began to input commands on his datapad, diverting the ship's cooling fluid system to create a temporary, low-energy containment field around the swirling golden archives, temporarily freezing the transfer process. His heart still hammered, but his mind, now given a complex engineering problem to solve, had finally found its calm. The neutral anchor was working, even unplugged. The tense truce established on the bridge of the Daughter's Crucible was powered by necessity and regulated by Jax's quick thinking. The merged archive entity, a swirling mass of golden light now held in stasis by the jury-rigged containment field, hummed with suppressed power. It felt like standing next to a highly impatient, sentient supernova that was merely waiting for the right moment to expand. Jax, having secured the engineering access codes, found himself suddenly promoted from biological anchor to essential hostage engineer. He was now busy, which, paradoxically, made him feel calmer than he had in weeks. An engineer solving a problem is an engineer at peace, even if the problem involves containing 5 dead civilizations. He set up a temporary workstation near the wreckage of the holographic projector, accessing the ship's internal fabrication logs. Lyra stood nearby, silent and intensely watchful, her arms crossed, her elven ears casting sharp, watchful shadows in the low, pulsing light. Kira, the warrior queen, was posted at the entrance to the bridge, a posture Jax affectionately dubbed impatient lethal guardian mode. "All right, Lyra," Jax said, not looking up from his datapad as he scrolled through schematics for high-density biocomposite resins. "You want to transmit a perfect signal? We need a proper server. The progenitors designed my ancestor to be the key, not the persistent storage unit. That's a massive design flaw, probably implemented by a progenitor who got tired of data migration. The human vessel was designed to be the temporary catalyst for the final broadcast," Lyra corrected, her voice precise. "The monolith was intended to draw the archives from you directly, transferring the life seed to a new world." "Right, but we have 2 variables they didn't account for," Jax countered, tapping the screen to highlight a complex molecular structure. Variable 1. The landing was rough, and the monolith's receiving frequency shifted slightly, as confirmed by Ziva's internal models. Variable 2. I prefer living, which necessitates a temporary holding cell for your immense, volatile data. Now, the Crucible has some fabrication capabilities, primarily for structural repairs. I'm looking for something that can handle a chronotope field without immediately degrading into static." Jax found a suitable candidate, a rare, self-assembling graphene diamond lattice resin, typically used for repairing minor hull breaches in warp transit. It was perfect, dense, non-reactive, and structurally sound enough to contain a miniature galaxy. "Found it. Graphene diamond lattice resin," Jax announced. "We can fabricate a hardened server core. Think of it as a custom-built, artisanal hard drive for your people. It'll take us about 4 hours of continuous energy drain to synthesize enough of the material for a proper containment unit." Kira, from her post, rumbled, "4 hours is unacceptable. The Hegemony scout vessel is merely disabled. They will attempt to recover or transmit their findings to their nearest patrol point soon." "They're not doing anything for the next 6 hours, Kira," Jax said dismissively. "I blasted their comms and navigation with enough residual plasma to give their entire crew a decade of bad luck and permanent static interference. Trust me, I know what a cooked sensor array looks like. I've personally created dozens of them." Lyra stepped closer, watching him manipulate the schematics. "This material, will it maintain the biological resonance required for the monolith to recognize the archives?" "Ah, the resonance factor," Jax nodded, finally looking up at her. He leaned back on his heels, pushing his hair back from his forehead. "That's where the progenitor key comes in. If we embed the key, which is obviously a high-grade neural transducer, into the center of the hardened resin, it should create an artificial bioresonance signature. It won't be as good as my warm, stressed brain, but it'll be a clean, consistent target for the monolith to lock onto." He held up the bone-white disk of the progenitor key. "This becomes the central stabilizing pillar, and the archives sit safely around it. Crisis averted. My body remains mine, and your data is safe and ready for transmission." Lyra stared at the key, then at Jax. "You propose an artificial progenitor surrogate. A solution outside the 10,000-year-old protocol." "Yes," Jax confirmed cheerfully. "Because 10,000-year-old protocols are notorious for having catastrophic blind spots. Trust the engineer, Lyra. We solve problems. We don't become them." Ziva, who had been analyzing his calculations from the sidelines, finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "The mathematical probability of success for the artificial surrogate is 91%, given the material density and the key's known resonance signature. The probability of success using the Epsilon 7-9-2 bioincubation model is now 22% due to his elevated neural resistance." "See," Jax interjected, spreading his hands. "I'm officially a terrible host. I'm too high maintenance. Let's build the box." Lyra slowly nodded, conceding the point to the cold logic of survival and Ziva's statistics. "Proceed, Engineer Thorne." 4 hours. Kira, you will accompany him to the fabrication bay. Perfect, Jax grinned, gathering his tools. Just try not to stab me while I'm operating heavy machinery, Kira. That generally violates workplace safety regulations across multiple sectors. The journey to the fabrication bay was a tense, silent affair. Kira followed Jax with the relentless vigilance of a shadow that was 6.5 feet tall and covered in black, organic armor. Jax mostly occupied himself with reviewing the schematics and trying to mentally calculate the exact amount of power he could siphon without completely tripping the ASE. You are surprisingly calm, given your circumstances, Kira observed flatly as they traversed a wide, curving corridor. That's because I'm busy, Kira, Jax explained, not slowing his pace. Worry is inefficient. When I'm working, I'm not thinking about my impending doom. I'm thinking about tensile strength and power coefficients. It's much healthier. Besides, if I die, the archives are damaged, and then you have to deal with Lyra, who seems to be holding it all together with sheer, majestic willpower. He paused, gesturing to the seamless, shimmering wall of the corridor. Tell me, Kira, about the ship. If it's truly symbiotic, does it complain about the cargo? Is the Crucible aware that it's carrying 5 dead civilizations and 1 very annoyed human? Kira stopped, her armored faceplate rotating slightly as she regarded him. The ship is aware of the archive's value. It is aware of your resonance. It is a vessel of continuity, Thorn. It exists to serve this purpose, no more, no less. Right. The ultimate civil servant, Jax mused. But if it's symbiotic, it has needs. I bet it needs more coolant. I keep seeing readings for residual thermal stress near the main plasma conduits. You queens are great at destiny, but I bet you skip the preventative maintenance. He continued to the fabrication bay, a brightly lit chamber that housed 3 massive, silent molecular printers. He immediately set to work, inputting the complex instructions for the graphene diamond lattice resin. As the first printer whirred to life, heating the chamber and generating the telltale scent of ozone and newly structured matter, Jax pulled up the ship's internal chronometer. He realized he had a few moments of semi-distracted quiet while the synthesis began. So, Kira, Jax asked conversationally, pulling out a fusion cutter to prepare the internal structure of the containment core. The Elveneered Queen, the Armored Queen, the Crystalline Queen, the Masked Queen, and the Light-Bending Queen. 5 queens, 5 civilizations. Who do you rule, Kira? Or did your people share your robust sense of aesthetics? Kira shifted, leaning against a storage locker filled with unidentifiable, glowing components. I am Kira of the Kalan sovereignty. We were a species defined by structural integrity and collective defense. My people specialized in the melding of organic tissue with hardened, ceramic exoskeletons. We were the Guardians. Guardians, Jax nodded, watching the resin slowly begin to form a black, dense paste in the molecular printer. That explains the outfit. Did you ever, take a holiday? Go somewhere warm, wear something less intimidating. There were no holidays after the convergence, Kira stated, her voice flat. There was only the defense of the archive, and ultimately, the flight. The convergence, Jax repeated, recognizing the hegemony's sanitized term for the massive, multi-sector war that had reshaped the galaxy 2 centuries ago. Right. The reason why 5 civilizations are now compressed onto a chronotope disk. He looked at Kira, feeling a sudden surge of genuine curiosity that overcame his fear. What did you guard, Kira? What was so valuable that 5 different species, from 5 different points in the galaxy, all ended up running to the same desert planet with the same ancestral marker? Kira was silent for a long beat, the low, mechanical drone of the printers filling the space. We guarded the source code. The original, uncorrupted, algorithmic definition of sentience. Jax stopped cutting. He looked up, his expression serious for the first time since their standoff. Sentience. You mean, the fundamental principles of consciousness? Yes, Kira confirmed. The progenitors, the source civilization that created the archives and the monoliths, understood that physical empire is temporary. Data is eternal. They compressed the essence of existence, the core code that enables self-awareness, into a format that required 5 highly specialized genetic carriers, us, and one incredibly simplified resonant conduit, your ancestor, and now you, to activate the final broadcast. So, I'm not just saving your family photos, Jax whispered, returning to his work with renewed urgency. I'm saving the secret to existence. That's a little above my pay grade, Kira. I usually just fix the coffee machine. Your importance is not in your skills, but in your lack of complexity, Kira said, stepping toward him, her large frame casting a shadow over the molecular printer. Your simple human genome is the perfect, clean receiver. It is the definition of baseline resonance. Baseline resonance, Jack sighed, shaking his head. I'm the ultimate low-tech solution. It's like sending the most important secret in the universe via a messenger pigeon. As the molecular printer finished synthesizing the graphene diamond lattice resin, the lights in the fabrication bay flickered violently, plunging the chamber into darkness for a terrifying second before the emergency power kicked in. The red lights cast Kira's armored form in stark relief. What was that? Jack snapped, grabbing his multi-tool, his heart hammering. External interference, Kira stated, moving instantly into a defensive posture, her body angled toward the main corridor. The scout vessel is attempting to run a high-frequency sonic disruption, a basic attempt to scramble our internal systems. Basic and irritating, Jax muttered, racing to a nearby maintenance terminal. It's trying to blind our internal sensors and disrupt the ASE's connection to the monolith. Lyra needs to know the monolith's pull is weakening. If the link breaks before the containment core is ready, the merged archives will explode inside the bridge. Jack stabbed his multi-tool into the terminal port. Kira, buy me 30 seconds. I have to reroute the power from the fabrication bay to the hull stabilizers to counteract that sonic disruption. 30 seconds, Kira accepted instantly, her voice now a low, predatory growl. She turned and strode out of the fabrication bay, vanishing into the dim corridor, presumably to intimidate the invisible sonic waves with her sheer, concentrated anger. Jax worked frantically, sweat stinging his eyes. He bypassed the complex security firewalls that Lyra had installed, routing the massive power intended for the molecular printer directly to the nearest set of hull stabilization plates. The ship shuddered, fighting the invisible sonic assault. He managed to neutralize the sonic disruption just as the molecular printer finished its work. A perfect, dense, coffin-sized block of black, glittering graphene diamond lattice resin sat ready for him. Jax grabbed the fusion cutter and swiftly carved out a hollow in the center of the block. He then retrieved the progenitor key, which he had tucked into his pocket, and carefully placed it in the recess. "All right, source code," Jax whispered, looking at the silent, bone-white disk. "You're getting an upgrade." He activated the secondary printer, coating the key in a thin layer of transparent, insulating biogel. Now he just needed to get the block to the bridge and put the archives inside before Kira decided that 30 seconds was too long and just decided to terminate the entire mission. As he hefted the heavy, dense block of resin, the comm system crackled to life, relaying Lyra's strained voice from the bridge. "Jax, the scout vessel is deploying ground troops. Kira is engaging them on the upper decks. We are under siege. Bring the containment core now." Ground troops. Jax groaned, lifting the block onto a small, automated cargo drone he had hastily repurposed. "I knew I should have charged those cannons more. This is why you always carry a backup plan for your backup plan." He activated the cargo drone, and the small platform zipped out of the fabrication bay, carrying the heavy black box, the only stable future for 5 dead worlds, straight toward the sound of Kira battling their rivals. Jax followed, armed only with a cutting laser and a sense of professional indignation that his solution was about to be destroyed by alien foot soldiers. The journey from the fabrication bay to the bridge was interrupted by sudden, sharp bursts of directed energy fire. Kira, the queen of structural integrity, was not merely fighting. She was creating highly effective, temporary bottlenecks in the ship's organic corridors. Jax's repurposed cargo drone, carrying the priceless graphene diamond lattice containment core, trundled along ahead of him, protected by its low profile and Jax's insistence on sticking close to the ceiling vents. He caught up to Kira near the main personnel lift shaft. She was crouched behind a strategically melted section of bulkhead, firing rapid pulses of kinetic energy from a wrist-mounted device, a weapon that seemed to be an integrated part of her exoskeleton. 3 hegemony-style commandos, clad in dull gray tactical armor, lay motionless in the corridor. "Jax! The containment unit!" Kira barked, not looking up, her focus fixed on the stairwell beyond. "It's secure," Jax yelled back, crouching beside her, the air thick with the smell of scorched metal and residual plasma. "But I'm detecting 4 more hostiles moving up from the hangar bay. They're using thermal masking stealth suits. They're slow, but they're coming." "I am aware," Kira grunted, firing again. Their attempt to blind our long-range sensors with the sonic disruption was a prelude to boarding. "They want the archives." "Well, they're not getting them," Jax said, pulling out his multi-tool and extending the cutting laser. He felt a weird surge of adrenaline. He was an engineer, not a soldier, but the idea of some hegemony grunt destroying his beautiful, complicated, newly built artificial progenitor surrogate filled him with genuine rage. "I'm going to run the drone to the bridge. You pin them here." "I am the guardian of this ship," Kira said, her voice flat. "But I cannot hold this position indefinitely." "Just hold it long enough for me to upload the entire legacy of 5 civilizations into a highly secure, non-human container," Jax replied, giving the drone a shove. "If I fail, you can always go back to trying to use my brain as a memory stick. But I'd really prefer not to." He sprinted away, following the slow-moving drone carrying the black resin box. The bridge was 2 levels up, through the command nexus. As he entered the nexus, a circular junction chamber, he saw the other 3 queens struggling to maintain the status quo. Ziva, the crystalline queen, was frantically inputting defensive protocols, her body shimmering with visible electromagnetic interference. Anya, the masked queen, was holding an unusual, curved staff that was emitting a high-pitched, disorienting sound, a psychic dampener meant to confuse the boarding party's comms. Eris, the light-bending queen, was creating localized gravitic distortions in the corridor that kept the remaining commandos stumbling and crashing into the walls. "The archives are destabilizing," Lyra cried out, standing over the central pool where the golden energy pulsed erratically. "The energy drain from the sonic disruption is too great." "I've got the containment core," Jax shouted, skidding to a halt. He quickly uploaded a final command into the drone, sending the graphene diamond lattice box directly to the center of the bridge. "Lyra, you need to use the progenitor key to pull the merged archive entity from the containment field into the new surrogate." He tossed the bone-white key to Lyra. She snatched it from the air with the reflex of a seasoned leader. "Ziva, I need a localized, full-spectrum shield around the containment core, not the whole bridge, just the box. Eris, keep the commandos dancing. And Anya, turn that thing up. I can hear myself think." The queens, stripped of their ceremonial elegance and acting purely on survival instinct, moved with immediate, perfect coordination based on Jax's rapid-fire technical commands. He, meanwhile, wrestled the thick, ripped biosynthetic transfer cables, which were still connected to the volatile archive energy, and began splicing them onto the reinforced input ports he had designed into the black resin box. The process of connecting the cables felt like trying to thread a needle while holding 5 live electrical wires. The golden energy hissed and sparked, and Jax could feel residual memories and ancient languages trying to force their way into his mind through the contact points. "They used me as a temporary neural conduit right after the jump, Lyra." Jax yelled over the noise, his face inches from the sparking cables. "That's why the ship knew my exact schematics for the ASE. My ancestors' knowledge was downloaded when I was rescued. It was necessary for the jump stability." Lyra shouted back, already pressing the progenitor key against the graphene diamond lattice. The black box pulsed. The swirling golden energy entity, sensing a proper, stable vessel, surged from the central pool, flowing through the cables and into the prepared cavity of the artificial progenitor surrogate. The transfer was immense, yet strangely smooth, like pouring liquid light into a solid container. In the corridor outside the nexus, a final commando, having bypassed Eris's gravitic traps, burst through the entrance. He aimed a plasma rifle directly at the containment core. "Stop the transfer!" the commando roared, his voice synthesized and distorted. Before the commando could fire, Kira reappeared in the doorway, moving with shocking speed. She didn't use a weapon. She tackled the commando with the force of a small asteroid, slamming him against the wall of the nexus. The commando's rifle fired wildly, incinerating a nearby structural column and sending a shower of molten alloy across the floor. Transfer complete. Ziva shrieked in triumph. The black resin box snapped shut, becoming a seamless, solid object that hummed with a deep, contained power. The golden light vanished, replaced by a single, steady violet pulse emanating from the embedded progenitor key. The combined archives of the 5 civilizations were safe. The archives are secured in a stable chronotope field, Jax announced, pulling his hands away from the now-safe container, relief washing over him in a dizzying wave. The surrogate is online. Now we transmit. Lyra, holding the now-quiet progenitor key, stared at the massive, black box. Her expression was a complex mixture of disbelief and profound gratitude. "You created a new destiny," she whispered. "I built a better server," Jax countered. "Now let's use it. We need to raise the box to the main antenna and synchronize the monolith's frequency. I need full power, no more siphoning." Kira, having dispatched the final commando with a quick, efficient maneuver, rejoined the group, standing guard over the black box. The ship fell silent, the immediate threat neutralized. Jax quickly pulled up the ship's engineering interface. "Lyra, direct all remaining power to the gravitic emitters. We're not using the internal lift. We're taking this thing straight up to the antenna." Within seconds, the graphene diamond lattice containment core began to lift, slowly rising through the ceiling of the bridge, passing through successive decks via carefully controlled, localized gravitic fields. Jax was essentially performing high-stakes, internal cargo delivery using nothing but pure physics. "Ziva, patch the monolith's frequency into my datapad," Jax commanded. "I need to align the pulse rate of the containment core to the monolith's receiving rhythm. If the frequencies don't match, the monolith will reject the transfer and melt my custom-built storage unit." Ziva quickly transmitted the data. Jax saw the monolith's receiving frequency, a slow, measured pulse, almost like an incredibly deep bass note. He began adjusting the pulse rate of the containment core, which was currently humming at a frantic, high-energy pace. He slowly brought the pulse down, modulating the frequency using the progenitor key's embedded functions. Frequency match at 80%, 90%, 100%. Jax yelled. "It's locked. Lyra, release the final gravitic pulse. Send it to the antenna." Lyra, her eyes blazing with renewed focus, slammed her hand down on the main control panel. A final powerful gravitic charge shot through the ship, accelerating the containment core up through the ship's final layers of structure. Outside, Jack saw the result in the viewport. The black box, now securely positioned within the Crucible's massive primary antenna array, began to absorb the golden light from the towering monolith. The transfer was not just successful. It was perfect, a clean, continuous, harmonious stream of energy. The monolith, recognizing the perfect, stabilized resonance signature of the artificial progenitor surrogate, began its final work, broadcasting the source code and the genetic legacies of the 5 dead civilizations across the sector. "Transmission initiated," Lyra stated, her voice thick with emotion. "The archives are broadcasting. Our people, they live on." The intense golden light from the monolith faded slowly, replaced by a soft, pale shimmer as its purpose was fulfilled. The monolith was quiet again, a passive, enormous lens in the golden desert. Jax leaned against the console, utterly spent. He looked at Lyra, who was standing tall, a posture of victory in her spine. "So," Jax said, pulling a wrench from his belt and tossing it lightly into the air. "The fate of 5 civilizations secured by an engineer who refused to be used as a USB stick. What happens now, Lyra? Do I get a medal, or are we back to discussing my destiny?" Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes assessing him with a gaze that held respect, power, and something Jax couldn't quite decipher. "You saved us, Jax Thorne. You solved a problem the progenitors failed to anticipate. But your ancestral marker is still bound to the monolith's command structure. And the rival forces from the scout vessel are still recovering in the desert, knowing that the source of life seed has just been transmitted." "Right," Jax sighed, rubbing his temples. "So, no rest for the wicked, and definitely no rest for the engineers who refuse to follow directions. I guess we're back to being a fast, heavily armed taxi service. He suddenly remembered the cargo drone, now sitting empty on the deck. Well, at least the drone survived. That thing's battery life is phenomenal. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go recalibrate the life support system. All that psychic energy transfer really throws off the air filtration, and I refuse to breathe air that smells like destiny and ozone. He headed toward the exit, passing Kira, who nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared fight. He was alive, his brain intact, and he had built the perfect hard drive for a galaxy of dead souls. Now, he just had to figure out how to escape the queens who owed him a favor, and avoid the hegemony scouts who probably owed him a bullet. The final broadcast had left the daughter's crucible running on fumes. The vast amount of energy required to upload the merged source code via the monolith had drained the anomalous signature engine, ASE, to near zero. The huge, silent ship now rested heavily in the golden dust of Xylos, a gigantic, technological beached whale. Jax, having successfully averted both the end of reality and his own neural obliteration, was supervising the main reactor cooldown. He wore a triumphant, if slightly singed, expression. He had finally been granted full, unrestricted access to the engineering logs, his original price, paid in full. "Okay, Lyra," Jax announced, emerging from the auxiliary tunnel. He had a smudge of grease across his cheek and was carrying a datapad displaying a complex genetic sequence. "I found him. Your ancestral marker. The reason why my family line has been stuck with the Epsilon 7-9-2 designation for generations of paperwork." Lyra, Ziva, and Eris were gathered on the bridge, the massive black containment core, now gently pulsing with stabilizing violet light, secured near the central control pool. Kira was running a perimeter scan, watching the distant, disabled hegemony scout. "The logs identify him as engineering analyst Jorn Thorn," Jax continued, pointing to the datapad. "He wasn't a hero, a prophet, or a king. He was a junior tactical engineer working on the progenitor's final defense project. He didn't build the rescue beacon, he simply calibrated its emergency frequency, the one that only responded to my specific, baseline resonance genome, and then he coded a final, bitter message." Lyra stepped forward, her serene expression wavering for the first time. "What message?" Jax cleared his throat, reading the antique text from the datapad. Quote, "To whom it may concern, if this frequency is activated, it means we lost. The source code is archived. Do not rely on high-tech solutions. They always fail. Trust only the simplest, most reproducible factor. And for the love of the galaxy, use a graphene diamond lattice for final containment. This bioincubation plan is ludicrous. Jorn Thorn, Epsilon, 7-9-2, signing off, probably to be eaten by something large and ancient. P.S. Tell them to ditch the elven ears. They look ridiculous on the command staff." A stunned silence filled the bridge. Lyra's face was a study in profound, alien shock. He insulted my ancestral aesthetic?" Lyra finally asked, a tremor in her voice. "And he explicitly warned against your entire primary operational protocol," Jax confirmed, trying to stifle a laugh. "Turns out, my ancestor was just a highly annoyed engineer who hated inefficient protocols and left a safety override coded into his bloodline. He anticipated your flaws, Lyra. He didn't trust destiny, he trusted his own final diagnostic report." Ziva, the crystalline queen, actually allowed a faint, complex pattern of amusement to flicker across her skin. The human arrogance of the original Epsilon, 7-9-2. It is statistically impressive. "It's called professional pride," Jack said, pocketing the datapad. "And it's why my low-tech solution saved your 5 high-tech civilizations. Now we know the truth. I'm not the destiny, I'm the patch update." The immediate danger, however, was not the insult to elven fashion, but the lingering presence of the hegemony scout vessel. Kira returned to the bridge, her armored plates scuffed but intact. "The enemy vessel is still disabled, but the residual energy from the monolith's broadcast is acting as an external power source," Kira reported. "They are attempting manual repairs. They will be operational in 4 cycles." "4 cycles is too late," Lyra said, her voice now back to its authoritative contralto. "We have transmitted the source code. The monolith's energy is spent. We cannot jump until the ASE recharges, which will take weeks. We must escape this system before the Hegemony Patrol finds us. Jack stepped forward, the confidence of a man who just successfully contained a miniature galaxy radiating off him. We don't need to jump, Lyra. We need to hide. The Hegemony Scout only knows we're here because they followed our high-energy signature. Now that the ASE is dormant, we are just a big piece of metallic debris to them. We need to create a convincing distraction. He pointed toward the viewport, looking out at the endless golden desert. The monoliths are passive now, but they still have tremendous structural integrity and deep root systems connected to the planetary core. If we use the last dregs of power in the ASE to fire one final, highly focused plasma charge at the base of the nearest secondary monolith, not the big one, a smaller one, we can cause a localized geological event. A geological event? Lyra questioned. A dust storm, Jax elaborated. Not a natural one. A superheated, magnetized plasma wind. It will generate enough magnetic and thermal interference to scramble the Scouts' already damaged sensors, making them think there was a massive power fluctuation on the planet's surface. They'll have to flee the area and transmit faulty data to their Hegemony Patrol. It buys us the time we need to run minimal repairs on the ASE and sneak out. It is an aggressive, high-risk solution, Ziva observed. But the probability of long-term detection is reduced to 15%. Lyra gave a curt nod. Kira, prep the single remaining plasma charge. Jax, execute the power reroute. This is our final act of defiance. Jax executed the reroute with blinding speed, now fully integrated into the ship system. He felt the ship's weary core shudder as the last reserves were channeled into the weapon's capacitor. The blast was silent to the ship's occupants, but its effect was immediate. A geyser of superheated golden sand erupted from the base of the secondary monolith, twisting instantly into a chaotic, miles-high vortex of highly charged particles. The plasma wind raced across the desert, swallowing the disabled scout vessel in a thick, blinding cloud of metallic dust. Lyra monitored the comms. They are retreating. Their distress signal indicates maximum confusion and navigational failure. We are clear. With the Hegemony Scout safely panicked and running, a profound silence descended upon the Daughter's crucible. The crisis was over. The source code was broadcast, the archives were safe in their artificial progenitor surrogate, and Jax's brain was still happily his own. Lyra approached Jax as he began the tedious work of bringing the ASE back to life on minimal, non-visible power. "We owe you everything, Engineer Thorne," Lyra said, her voice soft. "Your ingenuity surpassed the wisdom of our ancestors. The source code is safely distributed, waiting to find new host worlds. Our civilization has achieved continuance." "It was just good engineering," Jax replied, adjusting a thermal regulator with a practiced hand. "Always find the simplest path, even if it involves blowing up sand dunes." "What will you do now?" Kira asked, stepping into the circle. "We cannot return you to Hegemony space. You are too valuable, and now too dangerous, to them." Jack smiled, running his hands over the smooth, now dormant hull plates of the ASE. "Well, I've got full schematics for a symbiotic starship, I've mastered the principles of synthetic chronotopes, and I've spent weeks in the company of alien royalty. My resume just got significantly more impressive, but perhaps less marketable." "We offer you a choice," Lyra said, her violet eyes serious. "We are the queens of the continuum. Our duty is done, but the crucible is still operational. We can use the ship to seek out the newly seeded worlds, to guide the growth of our young civilizations, teaching them the lessons of the past." Ziva added, "We require a persistent, stabilizing element. A chief engineer who understands the ASE and who is immune to our collective psychic dissonance. We require a neutral anchor who is also a strategist." Jax looked at the five queens: Lyra, the leader; Kira, the warrior; Ziva, the thinker; Anya, the mysterious psychic; and Eris, the field manipulator. They were no longer the terrifying, beautiful figures who had kidnapped him. They were the desperate, brilliant survivors of fallen empires, now looking to him for technical guidance. "You're offering me a job," Jax realized, a slow grin spreading across his face. chief engineer on the most advanced bioengineered ship in the galaxy, tasked with raising 5 new civilizations. Does this come with a decent retirement package, or at least a contractually obligated supply of non-battery-flavored rations? Lyra gave him that faint, subtle upturn of her lips again. We can fabricate any ration you desire. And your compensation will be the entirety of the progenitor's knowledge, all the technical data that Jorn Thorn tried so hard to hide from us. You will have access to technologies that defy human comprehension. Jax looked at the black containment core, now the only physical manifestation of the archives. He had started this journey as a frightened salvage engineer, clinging to the wreckage of his simple life. He had been forced to become a diplomat, a soldier, and a conceptual physicist, all to save his own brain from becoming a data repository. He had faced down the end of 5 worlds and come out the other side with his wits, his wrench, and a new destiny he actually found interesting. He, Jax Thorn, the low-tech solution, was now the chief engineer of the future. I accept the position, Jax stated, clicking the ASE back into a gentle, recharging hum. But we're implementing a few new rules, starting with preventative maintenance schedules and mandatory weekly briefings where everyone has to explain their psychic projections in plain, simple English. And Lyra, we need to talk about that hairstyle. We're running a mission of continuity, not a historical fashion show. Lyra inclined her head, accepting the criticism with surprising grace. Welcome aboard, Engineer Thorn. Now, let us begin. We have a universe to rebuild. As the crucible slowly lifted from the golden desert floor, vanishing into the sulphurous sky on the barest whisper of anti-gravity, Jax returned to the engineering bay. He was no longer Epsilon, 7-9-2, the simple placeholder. He was the one who fixed the impossible, the engineer who taught ancient aliens the value of a solid, modern blueprint. He knew, with sudden, exhilarating certainty, that this was going to be the most complicated, irritating, and gloriously rewarding job of his life.